The last bus does not use a map. The first impossible stop was called Hollow Square. The bus announced it in the same calm electronic voice it used for every real street, and 3 passengers stood up to leave. None of them looked confused. I knew every stop on that route. I had been taking the last bus home for more than 2 years. It left the office district shortly after midnight, crossed the river, past the old shopping blocks, and reached my neighborhood about 40 minutes later. My stop was the second to last one. After that, the bus continued to a small terminal beside an all-night gas station. The driver parked beneath the terminal lights, changed the route display to "Not in Service," and went inside for coffee. The routine was so familiar that I rarely paid attention. I finished work, walked 2 blocks to the shelter, tapped my transit card, and chose a seat near the rear door. I usually listened to something through one earbud and watched the dark storefront slide past the windows. That night began the same way. The bus arrived 3 minutes late. Its brakes released with a long breath. Rainwater shone beneath the tires. The driver was a tired-looking man I had seen before. He gave a small nod when I boarded. There were 9 other passengers. All of them were adults. A woman in office clothes sat near the front with a canvas tote on her lap. A man in a paint-stained jacket leaned against the window. 2 restaurant workers sat together without speaking. An older man held a folded newspaper beneath one arm. The remaining passengers were scattered through the bus, each keeping the polite distance people prefer late at night. I sat on the left side, 2 rows behind the rear door. The seat fabric felt cool through my coat. It had the rough, slightly dusty texture of upholstery cleaned too many times. A vent near my feet pushed out air that smelled faintly of rain, rubber, and warm machinery. The bus pulled away. For the first 20 minutes, the route was normal. The recorded voice announced, "Streets I knew." The display above the windshield showed each stop in amber letters. Occasionally, a passenger pulled the yellow cord. A soft chime sounded, and the display changed to "Stop, requested." The driver stopped. The doors opened. Someone stepped off and said a quiet "thank you." Then we reached the intersection where the route usually turned toward the river. The bus continued straight. I noticed because the turn always caused my shoulder to press against the window. That small movement never came. I looked up. Outside was a row of closed furniture stores and dark loading entrances. I did not recognize them. The electronic voice spoke. "Next stop, Hollow Square." The words were perfectly clear. 3 passengers stood. The woman with the canvas tote adjusted the strap over her shoulder. The older man folded his newspaper more tightly. A 3rd passenger moved into the aisle and waited behind them. Nobody pulled the cord. The display already read, "Stop, Hurricane dead." The bus slowed beside a concrete wall. There was no square. There was no shelter or street sign. Only a narrow service road running between 2 windowless buildings. The doors opened. The 3 passengers stepped down. The woman thanked the driver. He nodded. They walked into the dark service road without hesitation. The doors closed. I turned in my seat to watch them, but the bus had already moved on. The wet window turned the outside world into streaks of grey and yellow. I removed my earbud. The man in the paint-stained jacket was looking at his phone. The restaurant workers sat with their hands folded in their laps. Nobody seemed interested in the strange stop. I opened the map on my phone. The bus route appeared as a blue line. According to the map, we were still approaching the river turn. The location marker remained near the intersection we had passed several minutes earlier. I searched for Hollow Square. No result appeared nearby. There were businesses with Hollow in their names. There were several public squares. None matched the stop. The recorded voice returned. "Next stop, Bellwether Steps." The amber display showed the same words. A passenger near the middle stood and pulled the cord. The chime sounded. "Stop requested." The process was completely normal. That was what made it difficult to react. Nothing dramatic happened. The lights did not flicker. The bus did not speed up. The driver kept both hands on the wheel and watched the road. Only the name was wrong. We stopped beside a row of metal shutters. Above them was a long apartment walkway with no visible stairs leading up to it. The passenger stepped off. He waited on the sidewalk while the doors closed. Then he walked toward one of the shutters. Nobody looked back. The bus continued. I checked the route map posted above the seats. The printed list showed 26 stops. Hollow Square and Bellwether Steps were not among them. I counted the passengers. 6 remained, not including me or the driver. The next stop was called North Orchard. Outside, there were no trees. The bus stopped beneath an overpass where several concrete columns disappeared into darkness. A man in a dark coat stood and exited. He did not pull the cord. The display had already changed to stop requested before he moved. I looked toward the driver. His face appeared in the long mirror above the windshield. His expression was neutral. He watched the passenger leave, closed the doors, and pulled into the empty road. I considered asking him what was happening. The question seemed simple while I remained seated. It became harder when I imagined walking to the front. Everyone else accepted the route. If I asked whether Hollow Square existed, I might be the only person admitting I did not know where I was. There is a particular pressure created by other people's calm. If a fire alarm sounds and nobody moves, you wait for someone else to stand first. If a stranger enters the wrong room and everyone greets them, you assume you forgot an introduction. Normal behavior is often nothing more than agreement. On that bus, everyone had agreed. The stops were real. I was the only one who had not been asked. The voice announced another stop. Old Glass. The name appeared on the display. The restaurant workers stood together. One straightened the collar of the other's coat. They waited near the rear door while the bus slowed. Outside was a small shopping strip. A laundromat glowed at one end. Beside it was a closed pharmacy with a red awning. A takeout restaurant stood on the corner. One letter in its sign had gone dark. I recognized the block. We had passed it 10 minutes earlier. The first time, the laundromat had been on the opposite side of the street. The restaurant worker stepped off. The doors closed between us. Through the window, I watched them walk toward the laundromat. Inside, every washing machine was turning. I could not see any customers. The bus pulled away. 4 passengers remained. I marked the block on my phone map, but the location marker still showed us near the river. I switched the map off and watched the street directly. A traffic light passed above us. One of its red bulbs was dark. We crossed an intersection with a mural painted on the corner building. The mural showed overlapping green leaves. Then came the pharmacy with the red awning. Then the takeout restaurant. Then the laundromat. We had returned to the same block. This time, the laundromat was on the left again. All the machines were still turning. The recorded voice said, "Next stop, Lower Market." The man in the paint-stained jacket put away his phone. He stood. I watched him pull the cord. The chime sounded. I spoke before I could stop myself. "Excuse me." He looked at me. His expression was not unfriendly. He seemed tired. "Do you know where Lower Market is?" The bus engine vibrated beneath the floor. He glanced at the display. "Next stop?" "I mean, what street is it on?" He considered the question. Then he looked toward the front. "You'll see it." The bus stopped beside a chain-link fence. Beyond it was a broad, empty space filled with rows of market stalls. White cloth roofs moved gently in the rain. No lights were on. The man stepped off. He walked along the fence until the bus moved beyond him. 3 passengers remained. One sat near the driver. Another occupied a seat across from me. The last was an older woman near the rear, holding a paper grocery bag on her knees. Nobody spoke. The bus passed the laundromat again, then the pharmacy, then the restaurant. The arrangement had changed. The pharmacy stood where the laundromat should have been. The red awning was now blue. The takeout sign had every letter lit, but the name was unfamiliar. The same traffic light hung above the intersection. The same red bulb was dark. I pressed the button on my phone and checked the time. It was 1:17. I should have reached home nearly half an hour earlier. The route application no longer showed the bus. A message said service had ended. The electronic voice announced, "Stillhouse Road." The older woman stood. The grocery bag made a soft paper sound against her coat. Before leaving, she paused beside my seat. I thought she might say something. Instead, she reached above me and pressed the red stop button fixed to the pole. The chime sounded. The display had already said, "Stop, requested." She gave me a small, apologetic smile, as if she had reached across my personal space for an ordinary reason. Then she stepped off. Outside was a narrow residential road. The houses had no visible driveways. Their front doors faced the street from only a few feet away. Every porch light was on. The woman approached the nearest house. The bus turned before I saw which door she entered. 2 passengers remained. The person across from me looked down at their hands. The passenger near the front stared through the windshield. I moved closer to the driver. I chose a seat in the first row rather than standing beside him. It felt less confrontational. "Are we on a detour?" I asked. The driver kept his eyes on the road. "No detour. This isn't the usual route. It's the last service." "I know. I take it every night." He glanced at the mirror. For a moment, his eyes met mine in the reflection. "Then you know to wait for your stop." The answer sounded reasonable until I thought about it. "My stop should have been 40 minutes ago." He looked forward again. "Was it called?" "No." "Then it wasn't your stop." I returned to my seat. The passenger across from me did not react. The voice announced, "The quiet end." That passenger stood. The bus stopped at a section of road bordered by tall wooden fences. There were no gates. The passenger stepped onto the pavement and walked along the fence, looking for nothing. The doors closed. Only one passenger remained near the front. The bus passed the laundromat again. The machines were no longer turning. The pharmacy was dark. The red awning had returned. A bus shelter stood outside the takeout restaurant. Inside the shelter was the woman with the canvas tote. She had left the bus at Hollow Square. She sat on the bench with the tote in her lap. She did not look up as we passed. The remaining passenger pulled the cord. "Next stop, far room," the voice said. We stopped beside a plain office building. Only one window was lit. It was high above the street. The passenger left. Before the doors closed, they turned toward the driver. "Good night." "Good night," the driver replied. Then I was alone with him. The interior of the bus felt larger without the other passengers. Empty seats reflected in the dark windows. The overhead lights made the aisle look pale and narrow. The engine produced a steady vibration through the floor. I watched the red stop button on the pole. I could press it. I did not know where the bus would stop. The route continued through repeating streets. The same laundromat appeared 6 more times. Each time, one detail changed. The machines turned clockwise, then counterclockwise. The awning beside it changed color. A payphone appeared near the shelter, then vanished. The traffic signal lost another light. At 1052, the electronic voice returned to normal. It announced the stop before mine. The familiar name appeared above the windshield. I stood and pulled the cord. The chime sounded. The driver stopped on the correct street. My neighborhood looked ordinary. The convenience store on the corner was closing. A delivery truck idled near the curb. The bus shelter carried the same advertisement I had seen that morning. I stepped off. The driver did not look at me. The bus continued toward the terminal. I walked home without turning around. The next morning I searched every impossible stop name. Hollow Square produced no useful result. Bellwether Steps appeared only in unrelated business names. North Orchard existed in several distant places, but not near the route. Old Glass brought up antique shops. The Quiet End produced articles, songs and phrases, but no transit stop. I checked archive route maps. I checked service updates and construction notices. There was no detour. I called the transit information line. The person who answered confirmed that the last bus had completed its route normally. It reached the terminal shortly after 1 in the morning. I asked whether the onboard announcements could play incorrect stop names. She said the audio system used route data loaded automatically. Could it load names from another route? Not usually. What about Hollow Square? She searched. We don't have a stop by that name. Bellwether Steps? No. Stillhouse Road? No. She asked which bus number I had taken. I gave it to her. There was a pause while she checked. That vehicle wasn't assigned to the route last night, she said. I looked at the transit card receipt in my email. It showed the correct route number and boarding time. Then what bus was it assigned to? No route. It was listed as unavailable. I ended the call. That evening I left work early. I took the bus before the last one. It followed the normal route. The recorded voice announced every familiar stop. We crossed the river at the correct place. The laundromat appeared once on the correct side of the road. I reached home on time. For the next week, I avoided the final bus. I changed my schedule when possible. I took ride shares. I walked part of the way and connected with another route. Nothing unusual happened. I began to believe the first night had been a technical problem made worse by fatigue. A corrupted route file could explain the names. Construction could explain the streets. A location error could explain the map. The passengers might have known temporary stops that I did not. Each explanation was weak. Together, they were enough to let me sleep. Then a late shift kept me at work until after midnight. Rain had turned to wet snow. Rideshare prices were unusually high, and the estimated wait kept increasing. The last bus arrived while I stood beneath the shelter. It was not the same vehicle. The driver was a woman I had seen on several ordinary nights. She wore a dark uniform sweater and kept a stainless steel travel mug beside her seat. I felt relieved. I boarded. The fare reader gave its normal tone. 8 passengers were already inside. The woman with the canvas tote sat near the front. The man in the paint-stained jacket sat beside the rear door. The older woman held the same paper grocery bag. None of them looked at me. I remained near the driver. The first several stops were normal. Then the bus passed the river turn. Next stop, Hollow Square, the voice said. The woman with the canvas tote stood. I looked at the driver. She watched the road. The bus stopped beside the same concrete wall. The woman stepped off and thanked her. The driver nodded. The doors closed. I did not wait this time. Where is Hollow Square? I asked. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. It's the stop we just passed. It isn't on the route map. She looked toward the printed map above the seats. Not everything fits on those. That doesn't make sense. No, she said calmly. It doesn't. Then she turned her attention back to the road. The answer stayed with me. She had agreed with me, but her agreement changed nothing. Bellwether Steps came next, then North Orchard. The same passengers left at the same stops. They behaved exactly as before. The man in the paint-stained jacket pulled the cord for Lower Market. The older woman pressed the button above my seat before Stillhouse Road. Each passenger seemed to have a place in the sequence. I was the only person without one. That night, the familiar route never returned. The last passenger left at Far Room. I remained on the bus until nearly 3. The streets repeated in slower and simpler patterns. The laundromat. the pharmacy, the takeout restaurant, then only the laundromat and pharmacy, then only the laundromat. Eventually, there was only a bus shelter beneath a broken traffic light. The shelter appeared every few minutes, switching sides of the road. At 3012, the driver spoke without looking at me. "You need to request your stop. I don't know what it's called. You'll know it when you hear it." "What happens if I don't?" She adjusted the wheel as the bus followed a gentle curve. "We keep going." The shelter passed again. The woman with the canvas tote sat inside it. This time, the man with the paint-stained jacket sat beside her. Neither looked at the bus. I watched the stop button. The red plastic reflected the overhead lights. I still did not press it. At 3:41, the electronic voice announced the familiar stop near my apartment. I pulled the cord immediately. The bus stopped. Outside was my neighborhood. I stepped off. When I turned, the route display on the back of the bus was blank. I waited until it disappeared, then I checked my phone. The time was 12:04. According to the clock, I had been riding for less than 30 minutes. My legs felt as if I had been sitting for hours. The next nights followed the same pattern. I began taking the last bus deliberately. I told myself I was collecting information. I wrote the stop names in a notebook. I marked which passenger left at each one. I counted the number of times the street repeated. Hollow Square, Bellwether Steps, North Orchard, Old Glass, Lower Market, Still, House Road, The Quiet End, Far Room. The order remained consistent. Some nights, additional stops appeared between them. Candle Street, second entrance, gray morning, the closed garden, previous house. No passenger ever questioned the names. New passengers boarded occasionally. They were all adults. They paid normally, chose seats, checked phones, and avoided unnecessary conversation. When an impossible stop was announced, one or more of them stood. They pulled the cord. They thanked the driver. They stepped into places that did not appear on maps. Once, at a stop called Underlight, the doors opened onto a brightly illuminated stairway descending beneath the street. 5 passengers left. They formed a neat line and walked down. Another night, the bus stopped at Paper Bridge. Outside was a covered pedestrian walkway stretching over a dark open space. The walkway appeared too narrow to support itself. A man carrying a briefcase stepped onto it without hesitation. The bus moved before I saw where it led. I tried asking passengers about the stops. Most gave ordinary answers. "Is this Candle Street?" "Yes." "Does this connect to the terminal?" "Not from here." "Have you taken this route before?" "Of course." One woman looked genuinely confused when I asked whether North Orchard existed. "We just passed it," she said. Another passenger told me Hollow Square was near Lower Market. When I asked what neighborhood that was, he said, "The one after the river." We had not crossed the river. Their answers did not sound rehearsed. They believed them. The collective certainty became harder to resist. After several nights, the strange names began to feel familiar. I knew which passengers would stand. I knew what the outside would look like. I knew Old Glass came before Lower Market and the Quiet End came after Stillhouse Road. The route had rules. That made it more dangerous. Anything repeated often enough becomes normal. I caught myself checking my phone when Bellwether Steps was announced, the way I usually did at the halfway point of my commute. I began to recognize the smell of wet concrete near Hollow Square. I knew the bus would lean slightly left before Paper Bridge. I even noticed when a stop was announced out of order. One night, the voice said, "Far Room," before the Quiet End. Several passengers looked up. Nobody spoke. The driver slowed, then continued without opening the doors. A minute later, the voice corrected itself. Next stop. The Quiet End. The waiting passenger stood. The route had made a mistake. The mistake proved it expected to be followed. My own stop became less reliable. Sometimes the bus returned to my neighborhood before 1. Sometimes it returned close to dawn. Sometimes it did not return until I pressed the cord during a familiar street and asked the driver to stop between announced stations. The drivers never refused. They also never explained. Each one behaved as if I were an inconvenient passenger who had failed to understand a simple system. I became afraid of falling asleep. If I slept through the moment the normal streets returned, the bus might continue until another night. I drank coffee before boarding. I sat upright. I kept one hand near the stop button. The other passengers often slept. They always woke before their impossible stops. No alarm sounded. No one called them. The electronic voice said the name, and their eyes opened. One night, I sat beside the older woman with the grocery bag. She had already left and reappeared across several journeys. Her bag never seemed to change shape. At Stillhouse Road, she stood. Before she stepped into the aisle, I asked, "How do you know this is your stop?" She looked down at me. "Because it's where I live. What's there? My place. Have you ever missed it?" Her expression changed slightly. Not fear, concern. The look someone gives a stranger who has asked a question that is too personal. "No," she said. Then she left. Outside, the row of houses stood with their front doors close to the street. Every porch light was on. This time, I noticed that each house had the same number. My notebook grew thick with observations. I kept it hidden at home because looking at it during the day made the apartment feel connected to the route. The pages listed stops, times, passengers, and repeating buildings. There was no clear pattern in the names. Some sounded like places. Some sounded like instructions. Some sounded like descriptions of rooms. I searched for them repeatedly. The results never helped. Once, I found an old message board post mentioning Bellwether Steps. The page disappeared when I refreshed it. Another search placed North Orchard inside a shopping center that had never existed. A map result for Stillhouse Road appeared briefly as a blank grey square with no connecting streets. Then it vanished. The bus route itself remained absent from the transit application. After midnight, my fare history showed ordinary trips. The boarding stop was correct. The exit location was always my neighborhood, even on nights when I rode for hours. According to every available record, I had taken a normal bus home. The system did not contain Hollow Square. The passengers did. That was worse. A computer error could be corrected. A map could be updated. But dozens of ordinary people were leaving the bus at those places. They carried groceries, work bags, coffee cups, and folded umbrellas. They behaved as if they had been doing it for years. Maybe they had. The final night began with 12 passengers. I had never seen the bus that full so late. Some faces were familiar. Others were new. The woman with the canvas tote sat near the front. The older woman held her grocery bag. The man in the paint-stained jacket leaned against the rear window. A driver I did not recognize sat behind the wheel. He was an ordinary man with gray hair and tired eyes. A paper cup rested beside the fare box. I tapped my card. The reader displayed a message I had not seen before. Dole 1 remaining. It disappeared before I could decide whether it referred to my fare balance. I sat beside the rear door. The bus followed the normal route for 11 stops. Then, the river turn passed on our right. Hollow Square, the voice announced. The woman with the canvas tote stood. She looked at me as she entered the aisle. It was the first time she had acknowledged me. Her expression was calm. She moved aside slightly, leaving a clear view of the red stop button. Then she exited. Bellwether Steps followed. 2 passengers left. At North Orchard, a man folded his newspaper and stepped beneath the overpass. Old glass took 3 passengers. The laundromat windows glowed across the wet street. Every machine was turning, though the drums contained no clothes. The bus became quieter with each stop. People left. Empty seats multiplied. Their reflections remained in the windows for a few seconds after the doors closed. Then the streetlights erased them. At Lower Market, the man in the paint-stained jacket stood. Before leaving, he looked toward me. "Not much farther," he said. I did not ask what he meant. Still, House Road came next. The older woman stood with her grocery bag. She touched the pole near my hand. For a moment her fingers rested beside the stop button. "You should be ready," she said. "For what?" "Your address." Then she stepped off. The bus moved on. 5 passengers remained. They left at the quiet end, far room, second entrance, and previous house. The final passenger was a man in office clothes seated near the driver. The electronic voice announced, "The closed garden." He stood. As he passed me, he adjusted his coat and said good night. It sounded like a courtesy, not a warning. He left through the front doors. The bus pulled away. Only the driver and I remained. The display above the windshield went blank. The streets outside became unfamiliar. There were no shops now, no intersections, no traffic lights. The road ran between high concrete walls illuminated by evenly spaced lamps. The walls had no doors or markings. The bus maintained the same speed. I looked behind us. The road disappeared into darkness. "How many stops are left?" I asked. The driver looked at me through the mirror. 1. My hand moved closer to the button. "What is it called? You know the address." I did not answer. The electronic voice returned. It recited the number of my building, then the street, then my apartment number. It gave my full home address in the same calm tone it used for every stop. The amber display showed it word for word. My mouth became dry. The driver reduced speed. The walls outside continued without openings. I did not press the button. The bus passed beneath another lamp. The voice repeated my address. The display changed to STOP, quested. I had not touched anything. The driver watched me in the mirror. "You still need to ring," he said. "Why?" "So the doors know which side." I looked at the red button. The bus engine vibrated beneath my feet. The address remained on the display. I pressed it. The chime sounded. A second chime answered from somewhere outside the bus. The driver turned the wheel. A narrow opening appeared in the concrete wall. The bus entered. Beyond it was a covered platform. The ceiling rose higher than the bus lights could reach. Concrete columns extended into darkness. A long row of empty shelters stood along the platform, each lit from above. No road continued beyond the stop. The bus slowed. At the center of the platform was a bus stop pole. Its sign displayed my full address. Behind it stood a wall. Set into the wall was my apartment door. It was the same dull color. It had the same peephole, the same brass number, and the same small scratch below the lock. My doormat lay in front of it. There was no apartment building around it, no hallway, no windows, only the door, the wall, and a platform that disappeared between concrete columns. The bus stopped. The rear doors opened. Cold air entered. It smelled like the hallway outside my apartment after the cleaning crew had finished. Floor cleaner, old carpet, and warm dust. I remained seated. The driver waited. My address glowed above the windshield. The voice said, "This is your stop." I stood. The aisle felt longer than it had before. My shoes made small sounds against the rubber floor. I held the seat backs as I walked, though the bus was no longer moving. At the rear door, I looked toward the driver. "What's behind it?" I asked. He lifted his paper cup. "Your address." "That isn't my home." He looked through the windshield at the freestanding door. It's where the route has it. The doors remained open. I stepped onto the platform. The concrete beneath my shoes was dry. The bus doors closed behind me. The vehicle moved away without turning. It passed between two columns and disappeared into darkness. Its engine faded slowly. I stood alone beneath the high ceiling. The shelters were empty. Each one contained a route map, but the maps were blank. My address remained printed on the stop sign. The apartment door waited across the platform. A thin line of warm light showed beneath it. From behind the door came the low hum of my refrigerator. A pipe clicked. My living room clock marked a second. All the familiar sounds of home were there, arranged on the other side of a wall that should not have existed. I reached into my pocket. My key was still with me. Before I took it out, another key entered the lock from the other side.